Have you ever had a negative emotional reaction to something that runs so deep that anytime you hear or see something similar, you're brought right back to that same place? For me, it was a deep sense of resignation every time I heard ice cubes filling a rocks glass. As a young teenager, one of my chores was making ice cubes, the trays filled from yesterday as the cubes for today, and then refilling the trays for tomorrow. Ice cubes was something we kids rarely got to enjoy because there always had to be enough for the adults. This was a chore I came to hate, ice cubes representing so much more than frozen water. Making ice cubes so often meant that the rest of the day would be lost. Lost to cocktails, meaningless dinner conversation, and then quiet in front of the TV. We were a good WASP family with the unspoken rule of we don't talk about these things. So often the evening's conversation was limited to what was on TV. Anytime late afternoon or early evening I heard the freezer door open, it meant that the adults were indulging in another round. I would hear the freezer door open, their glass fill up with ice cubes, and then the pour from the bottle. What I didn't understand was that the adults in my life were doing exactly as they had been taught by their parents, numbing themselves as a normal course of their day, unwinding from their own stress. They did this often in the form of brown liquor. By the tender age of 13, I had started to look at and realize what my life already consisted of. 4 years of sexual abuse by 2 different men, and my life threatened if I told anyone. Half of my years already feeling very, very alone and silenced. The adults in my life, alone in their own cocktails, with ice cubes made by me to help bring them to numb. I was craving connection, yet I was looking for something that wasn't necessarily available from the adults I was living with. When a neighbor offered to show me how to smoke pot, I jumped, what I consider a first leap of faith. And I remember watching her fill the pipe and then lighting it. I'll never forget the feeling of that smoke as it first burned into my lungs, holding it in for optimal effect, and then blowing it out, and I felt a lightness, a release, and I could laugh. When I was high, I felt something other than numb. I wasn't alone in my pain. Feeling alone is something we often feel from time to time. It ebbs and flows as a normal course of life. We won't know who to talk to, so we'll remain silent. We're made fun of, and so we stop sharing. We feel different, and so we'll isolate. For those of us who grew up around alcoholics, feeling alone is often the norm. We all want to feel a part of something, to feel heard and to feel loved. Connection is a basic human need. We'll seek out places that will provide these things for us, even if it's the neighborhood bar, because at least there we're not reminded of how silent or lonely we may feel. A place I often found myself. So it's no wonder that I was attracted to and married men who were also numb on a regular basis. Number one was someone with whom I connected. We laughed and we had a good time. Yet a few years into our marriage, I was brought right back to that feeling of resignation from my teenage years whenever I heard the ice cubes fill his rocks glass. He too had an affinity for brown liquor. A few years into our marriage, our paths diverged. Yet I did everything within my power to keep it together. I ignored my own feelings and did everything I could to try to make him not want to drink. It took the event of 9/11 for me to finally pay attention. That day of 9/11, I was working directly across the river and I watched as the towers burned. On my way out of Jersey City, at one point I looked back and the South Tower was gone. I looked towards the North Tower and towards the top, Some of the floors were completely burned out, the steel beams looking like matchsticks holding up the top of the building. I looked away. A little while later, I looked back, and it too was gone. There was now a huge hole in the sky, and those burned out floors represented the emptiness I felt in my marriage. I looked at that wreckage for months, and I smelled it every day I walked to and from work. For weeks, I read about and heard about the stories. I looked at what my life had become, and I didn't want to live that way anymore. I had stayed because I thought it was better than being alone. And this was when I heard the whisper, life is too short. The night I was packing, number one put on Elvis Presley, Are You Lonesome Tonight? I politely asked him to turn it off, that it wasn't fair, and he nodded in agreement. I think he finally realized how alone I felt, and that while we were living under the same roof, we were essentially living separate lives. For us, it was too late, our relationship frozen in a time that was long past. A year after I left number one, I met number two. He was the connection I craved, a soulmate. This felt different. I would spend 10 years married to the man who would become my second alcoholic husband. Do you ever feel like the same thing keeps happening over and over, and you're just not sure why? Well, the universe will continue to give us the same lesson, only slightly different, until we finally pay attention. With number two, just like number one, about 5 years in, it all started to fall apart. Once again, I ignored my own feelings and did everything within my power to build a cocoon around him, in effect, to try to freeze out the rest of the world so that he wouldn't want to drink. He wasn't connected to himself, and there is no perfect ice cube. With number two, I was brought to my knees at what should have been the height of my career on Wall Street. After a second heart attack scare, I found myself alone in a hospital bed. He never did visit. I finally looked at the chaos that my life had become, and this time I heard the whisper, I can't do this anymore. How do you let go of your old stories? How do you shift? How do you change things when so many of us, 53% of us, have been affected by a loved one's alcohol dependency? My life began to change the moment I made the decision that living the way I had for so many years was no longer acceptable. I had started to work with a coach, and I remember that first call when she asked the innocent question, how do you want to feel? I was stunned when I realized that I couldn't answer that question for myself, and this stirred something deep within me. I realized I had been as frozen as those ice cubes I made as a teenager. It didn't matter that I was a senior director on Wall Street and I lived in a nice house in a nice town. I was walking through the motions of my own life. It was time for me to thaw. Yet where do you start when you don't know anything else? I was craving connection, yet how could I connect to anyone else when I wasn't connected to myself? For me, it was stepping off that path I had stepped on so many years earlier when I first felt that pot smoke burn into my lungs. Life was asking me to take a new leap of faith, this time to jump into a pool of warm, healing water. As Rumi said, how do you know the side you're used to is better than the one to come? First, I allowed myself to breathe. I looked at and got rid of the things that I was doing to fill up my days that kept me from paying attention. I stopped running. I sat and allowed myself to feel. I began to see every day as a beautiful gift and not something to be powered through or avoided. I turned around to face the shadows that I had run from for so many years. I began to see the gifts that were there for me all along. Second, I found balance. I stopped looking for the things outside of myself to make me feel good. I began to look within. I was gentle with myself, reminding myself that each day is a new day to begin again. I reminded myself that I did not get here overnight. Unraveling and unwinding this legacy I had created for myself was not going to happen overnight either. I continue to be a work in progress, and as I stumble along the way, I can pick myself up and dust myself off and take a new step forward. I came to the understanding that acceptance does not mean agreement. Acceptance gave me a great deal of peace. Acceptance allowed me to let go. Third, I cut the energetic cords to the things that no longer served me. The people, the situations, the stories. I walked away from the drama. I reclaimed that power that I had given away for so many years. I set myself free and became loyal to my own heart. By doing these three things, I came to a fundamentally different understanding of how to spend my time while I'm here on this planet. I came to the understanding that by illuminating the negative charges of our past, we can create an equally positive charge in our present. You have the power to carry you through each day. So what does life look like now, and what's possible for you? Imagine no longer running from your stories, the pain now transformed into wisdom. Imagine loving and forgiving yourself, having thawed your own cocoon. Imagine deeply trusting yourself and your connection with spirit, knowing that you're never truly alone. Imagine having transformed the negative reaction and now quickly understanding when someone or something is trying to pull you back, because they will try to pull you back. Imagine reclaiming your power because your stories and your legacy no longer define you. Imagine being at peace with yourself, thanking everyone and everything that has happened in your life to bring you to this very day. Shifting the power of an ice cube so that an ice cube is now just an ice cube. Thank you.